Everybody, welcome to eChannel News. We've got Frank. He's the CEO of GTDC. There's a organization, I believe, that coordinates all the distributors on planet Earth in the IT sector, and they've been doing this for quite a while. So I'm going to find out what's happening in distributor land. Frank, welcome. How are you?
Thank you, Julian, and glad to be here. And yes, I represent GTDC, which stands for Global Technology Distributor Council. We have been doing it for quite some time, about 25 years. And essentially, we're a nonprofit trade association whose role is to educate the IT ecosystem on the role and subsequently the value of distribution. And as you know, and I'm sure as your readers or your listeners know, that's evolved tremendously over the last 25 years. A lot driven by technology, but also a lot driven by the needs that got generated, through the new, shifts and changes in technology. So,
Sure. Frank,
and I'll talk a little bit about what we do as we go
yeah,
forward, if you're interested.
absolutely. So, Frank, what's the mission of GTDC? What's your mission when you get up in the morning? What are you doing? Everybody knows what distributors are, right? You
Yeah.
know, it's they're almost in the way they're the banking system of the IT channel. But what's your mission? What do you want to achieve in here?
Yeah, well, in that, what you just said is a really important point. My mission is to make sure people understand that it's far more than just the banking system and the logistics system of the, IT ecosystem, because that's what it was, right?
Mhm.
And that's how it started, as you and everybody in the space knows. When it started, distribution was a bank and a warehouse, and essentially it was a means to get product from a vendor into the customer space and everything in between. But it has evolved so much since then that the role and the function and the capabilities that distributors now have are just so much more than just a bank and a warehouse,
For
right?
sure.
And folks know that,
Yeah.
folks that are using distributors. But I will say, Julian, one of the things that we encounter all the time when we talk to the supplier organization is that one, as you know, there's a number of new suppliers coming into the space all the time, right?
Yeah.
Particularly on the security side, right?
Mhm.
Everybody's coming into the space, and many of them are really smart technical folks that don't have a clue about go to market, right?
Mhm.
What's the best way to go to market? What's an MSP do for me? What's an MSSP do for me? How does a channel partner play? What's the difference between a VAR and an MSP? Those kinds of things, right? And secondly, there's also a lot of folks within the supplier community that have had different roles that really don't understand in any level of detail all of the nuances of go to market and what role various people play. So the education that we try to provide to what's a distributor doing, how are they doing, what's their value, and what's their role tends to be needed, frankly, in the in,
Mhm.
in the marketplace.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously even the SaaS companies, cyber companies, there's this kind of like a rush, if you will, to get into the channel, but they quite don't maybe understand all the moving parts that requires in a channel. And some people think that, hey, just let me get a PRM portal and boom, I've got a partner program, away you go. It's a little bit more complicated, of course, than that. So distributors obviously have evolved. We've seen it. We see the cloud-based distributors come in and accelerate at breakneck speeds. We also see traditional distribution morphing and adjusting. More patents were awarded to Ingram Micro recently, automating the whole life cycle of moving products from point A to point B and so on. They're saving a lot of time, taking a lot of time out of the procurement process. And on top of that, they're adding a lot of value added support to as well that people don't realize. They've got a lot of resources that can help in cyber, in just about pretty much everything in technology. Um, and of course, distributors are also trying to modernize because we also have these massive marketplaces that seem to think they can muscle their way in and take over a lot of the, particularly the SaaS model solutions. All the major marketplaces and so on we talk about. And it's a different kind of distribution. It's not the same thing. Which segment of the distribution market are you focusing on? Is it the ones that's doing TIN and SaaS, or the ones that's cloud marketplaces like the AWSs of the world? What's your focus?
Yeah, well, our focus is the distributors that you described. And by the way, you probably just described it as well or better than I can in terms of exactly what's going on, right? Because that little period you went through just kind of fairly succinctly described what is happening, right? So what we focus on are what used to be the traditional we would call the traditional distributors, the folks that kind of started and been in place for many, many years, that have evolved their business and involved in it in an incredible way. The platforms that are being developed, that are in place out there, that the distributors have implemented and spent hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars to put in place, are making profound changes. The first you mentioned in the area of productivity, just incredible in advancements in terms of kind of quote to cash business process improvement. And when you talk to the suppliers that are using those vendors, and when you talk to the customers that are taking advantage, they'll tell you that the significance of these changes. I mean, getting a quote at one point might have been a half a day process. It's now down to a 10-minute process. I mean, there's multiple examples of that are out there. And it makes sense because now it's automated and people on both sides are able to take advantage of that. But it's way more than that, right? I view the investment in the platforms as really doing three things. One is the productivity enhancements, and they're there today, and people are talking about them today, and there's no debate. Second item you mentioned is the marketplaces. The thing about the marketplaces that for distribution that make them so compelling is that they're multi-vendor, multi-solution marketplaces that have been compatibility tested, that have been leveraged to ensure that they are able to provide a solution to an end user that's tested, that works, that's been authenticated, if you will. Many of the other platforms don't necessarily do that. When you have a vendor platform, it pretty much contains vendor product. It doesn't necessarily contain all the other components that are not part of that vendor's product set that solves the solution, as you well know. Same thing with some of the hyperscaler marketplaces. The hyperscalers have a significant presence in the space and do an excellent job, but they're not as complete as what you get from a distributor. Plus, the other difference with the hyperscaler marketplaces, people have to remember, their hyperscaler is a vendor, and those vendors have direct-to-customer relationships, which doesn't take place in distribution world. Distribution sells their products through their customers, so that's a major distinction. But the third piece, Julian, that I think is the most exciting is the whole idea of the enhancement of demand generation, right? If you talk to any of your constituents, if you talk to any of the VARs that are out there, any of the MSPs or MSSPs, and you say, what do you rely on from distribution? Well, they're going to tell you, well, I get all the basics. And they've all got to the point where they take a lot of them for granted. It's kind of like, well, I expect my distributor to be able to get me product on time, to be able to provide me with training and education. I expect that. But what I would really like for my distributor to do is to be able to help me generate business, right? Find me opportunities. And what these platforms are now starting to be able to do is through enhanced AI techniques, is to take 40 years of data that's out there, right, that these distributors have, and be able to leverage that data to go to their customers and say, hey, your end user purchased this configuration 4 years ago that is now ready for an upgrade. Here's the information that you need. You ought to take this as a lead and drive it and close it. That's game changing, right? And that is starting. That is starting to happen. I would argue it's not anywhere near it's going to be, but you can make the same case for any of the AI enhancements that are, that are sort of coming.
For sure.
But now, I say that, and people kind of think about it and say, well, that is really significant. What I think is even more significant is they're doing that, Julian, on the platform and as part of their business model that's been in place for, as I said, in some cases, 30, 40 years for some of these distributors. And they're building those new capabilities on the foundation that's already been built. So all the other distributor capabilities and, the things that people, consider to be important, like sales enablement tools and training and logistics, all of that's still in place. All of that's still in place. But on top of it, we now have, through these, cloud-based AI-enhanced platforms, all of this incremental capability. That's why people have to hear the story, right? Because there's more than just, as we mentioned earlier, more than just the old bank in the warehouse story.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, as the market changes and AI is changing the game even at a more rapid pace, right? The reality is for companies out there, it's really cool to have data for many, many decades, but I think the data in the last 3 to 5 years is really what matters the most, because software is now easy to spin up and spin down. Hardware, it's kind of hard to differentiate these days, who's got a better hardware in a laptop or a server and things of this. It just seems like we're all at a point when you've got to figure out how all the parts come together in a more cohesive way where you're not going to have these conflicts within these products, because that's a bit of a challenge. You want to have a tech stack for yourself and your clients that you could rely on. And what you're hoping, I think the biggest thing the distributors could bring to the table is we tested these products out, they work together, and that's it. All right. So if you go with this and this and that, you go home. We got you, right?
That's exactly right. The compatibility testing and the experience of knowing that those products have been tested, work together, and effectively solve a customer problem solves a lot of concern.
A huge game changer for sure.
Totally.
Another thing too, as well, that I see a lot of distributors are doing is they're actually writing together with their partners and saying, "Look, I know with this AI thing, it's crazy. I get it. We're getting some user case studies, right? We're developing it, and then come on board. Let us jump on this journey together, because everybody doesn't know exactly what to do, and I think that's where distributors can bring a big helping hand, because they see these examples happening in real time. They go back and say, "Oh, by the way, I know your kind of bill. I know what you sell. I know who you sell to, but I also have another 1,000 companies globally who sells roughly similar things to the same industry. And here's how they're doing AI, and here's how they're doing that, and here's how they're doing whatever." And so this kind of like sharing of information helps them to up their game without, having them to reinvent the wheel, making mistakes. They can help them to jump ahead. And I see that as an exciting thing as well, from distribution. What do you see there on that?
Yeah, no question. Distribution for years has effectively been able to share best practices, right?
Yeah.
Because what they've been able to do is, as they're providing services to, and disties serve, upstream, all of the vendors in
Everybody.
the space, right? Everybody. And then downstream, their customer sets, right? And what happens is, in a lot of cases, at the upstream level, the major vendors will introduce new products, new technologies, new ways to go to market, consumption models, things like that that are really significant. And what distribution has to do is figure out, all right, how do I make that work, right? How do I take that and make that work? And then once I do that, how do I then make it easy for everybody to take advantage of? So clearly what happens is a lot of the larger vendors will drive a lot of these different go-to-market initiatives, et cetera. And the smaller vendors end up taking advantage of it, because what distribution does is they then figure out how to make it work within the ecosystem, and then they take it to their smaller vendors in terms of best practices,
Mhm.
right? Same thing at the solution provider level, right? What the solution providers have come to depend, frankly, on the distributors for is, this is what I need to do. This is what I'm trying to accomplish. Help me, you
Mm,
know.
of course.
And in the area of AI, that becomes pretty basic, in terms of product compatibility, et cetera, because they've been doing that for so long and they're so good at it, and they have experts in each area. So they got, and they're set up by category. So you got security, storage, networking, endpoint devices, and they're set up by categories. And these folks are experts. But what I think is really starting to happen, that's really going to be game changing, is the ability for the distributors to really help in the implementation of AI and the various training that's going to be required, because people are just dying right now out there trying to figure out, how do I leverage this? How do I monetize this? And how can I possibly make the investments that need to be made in place? Because we're not talking about, minimal kinds of investment. We're talking about highly trained people that are really going to have to understand how to leverage it. It's not just you or I going in a chat GPT or one of the others and putting in a query and getting back. To be able to leverage it the way it needs to be at a business level requires, and is going to require, significant education, significant training. And my argument is the vast majority of, particularly the smaller MSPs or VARs or whatever they call themselves, because as you know, it blends, right? You got, they're selling hardware, they're an MSP, they sell professional services, they do a lot. But one thing that I know, because I ran one for a couple of years, is when it comes to making investments, like, I've got to go hire two really good, smart people to help me here. That's a significant decision,
Mm.
because you're not talking about, a minimal investment. You're talking about a pretty significant investment that's probably going to take 12 to 18 months to begin to get an ROI on. And what I see today is a lot of those folks that are in that space are turning to distribution to help them with guidebooks, with training, with AI institutes, and they're calling them a bunch of different things. The distributors are, but essentially that's kind of what's happening.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, when I speak to distributors, we see that as well. They're definitely fulfilling an important leadership role in these emerging technologies. But it takes a lot more now for MSPs to stay on top of their game, because they're also challenged. Their profitability is not great. A lot of 40% of the revenues that net revenues that other MSPs get is from other MSPs. So there's a bit of battle going on the front lines, because not everybody is created equally, right? Some of these guys are really advanced and they're doing really, really well. And all the ones who are lagging behind in their cybersecurity posture and implementing these new technologies, it's easy now to see these failures, and others are taking advantage of this. It used to be, well, lots of research comes out in this, but a lot of end customers will actually switch their solution provider if the new solution provider can guarantee that they have a better cybersecurity posture, just for that reason alone. And they could be been with that company for 20 years. It no longer matters because today's challenges is complicated, and we need to move with those times. Not to mention what's happening today with this in this wartime attacks that we're having as well, and the complex
Yeah,
complications having in companies and businesses, where it's not just
yeah,
about money anymore. It's about destruction. It's just ransomware. It's like,
yeah,
where is ransomware? Let's get that back.
yeah.
At
I'll
least we
tell
knew
you
what
what
the end game was.
yeah, I'll tell you what I've seen, Julian, and I think it will probably continue. I joined the board of a relatively small MSP about 3 or 4 years ago. They do $10 million a year, pure play MSP, right? Don't do anything else, and excellent, focused on one particular vertical, kind of the insurance or regulated business vertical, and very good business. But what I've observed over the last couple of years is as that MSP's customers have grown, and they do, because what happens is, even if you start out with a small number of either insurance agencies or agents, etc., they end up consolidating. So 100 seats goes to 200 seats, goes to 400 seats, goes to 800 seats, right? Initially, they didn't really need what distribution provided, right? They had the ability to just access product, or in some cases, they had their customer access the product, and they provided, the outsourced desktop services. But now what's happening, as their customers are getting bigger, and as the technology continues to get complicated, etc., the customers now need more. And so therefore they're asking the MSP to provide more. And the MSP stepping back saying, these are capabilities that I don't have today. If I'm going to grow and I'm going to keep that customer, because we all know that the biggest risk that they have is if your customer comes to you and you've had them as an MSP for 2, 3, 4 years and say, hey, I need this. Can you help me? If the answer isn't yes, they go somewhere else. And eventually the MSP business will go with it, right?
For
And so
sure.
what I see is a lot of the small to mid-size MSPs who maybe didn't need significant distribution support in the past because they viewed it as product support, and I
Yeah,
don't need
whenever I
product
need.
support.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, all of a sudden, they are needing different levels of support, and distribution is very interested in providing that. And I've seen a much, much greater focus on the part of the GTDC distributors on the MSP community. And that's a big part of why that's happening. And I think that'll continue to happen because, you just described it. It isn't getting any less complicated with the technology that we're seeing, with AI and all the enhancements that you're seeing. The requirement for secure, computing and a comfort level that the security piece of it is there is absolutely critical. And
No doubt.
most folks aren't going to try to do it themselves. They're gonna get some expert help.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's almost like climbing Mount Everest without oxygen. It's pretty hard to do now. You can't really do it all by yourself anymore. So the evolution of distribution is alive and well, is what I'm hearing, and they're evolving their whole model as well. From aggregators, which still will always be a need, because how do you deal with 100 different vendors? I prefer to deal with one than 100. So the aggregation is important. The skill set's important. The technologies to help them to do it bigger, better, faster, and smarter is going to be important. The ability to bring their customers into this new world as well as quickly as possible and smartly done is also going to be important. So the evolution continues. So where do you see distribution headed in the next, I don't know, year or two? What are they
Well,
telling you?
yeah, well, first of all, one of the things I would point all your listeners to is we just released a new report, a research report. We do about 3 a year. And for 2026, we just released one called Distribution, the Digital Force Multiplier.
Mhm.
And within that report, we talk about all of the capabilities. The fact that, for example, today, 86% of the vendors are already using a digital platform from at least one distributor. In many cases, it's multiples, but at least one. And so where I see this going is I see the services and support mechanisms that the distributors have put in place just continue to grow. So, back in the day when you and I were around in the beginning, 80% of what distribution, certainly in back when I did it, 80 to 90% of what distribution did was hardware. That's what they did.
Pick, pack, and ship.
Huh?
Pick,
Yeah.
pack, and ship. Yeah.
You got it. That has changed dramatically to the point where the services, SaaS support, et cetera, is now higher percentage-wise than hardware. There'll always be some component of hardware as long as there's some component of hardware required to run a business, right? Which, as you know, will always be there, but it's dropping. And what's happening is it's evolving to a platform-led set of capabilities that the distributors have that will help enable and support their customers both upstream and downstream. And I don't really call the vendor a customer. I really call him more of a partner to a distributor, but upstream and downstream in this age of digital transformation that we're still in the middle of. That's the role they're playing. And so they have completely digitized their business or on the way to completely digitizing their business. And that is a major undertaking and a major enhancement that we've seen over the past 3 or 4 years.
Absolutely necessary as well, because the only way we're gonna, be able to fulfill whatever is coming down the pipelines is we've got to modernize everything and do it better. I'll give you the last word here, Frank. First of all, how do they get a hold of this report? They go to your website?
GTDC, it rolls right off your tongue.
Maybe you may want to change the name at some point, but
we looked at that, and let me give you an interesting anecdote on that point. We looked at that, and the reason we looked at it is because when you really think about the term distributor, that does not today in any way, shape, or form really depict what they do, right? Because when you use the term distributor, what immediately conjures up in your head is, a distribution function, distributing product, et cetera. And as we've just spent 20 minutes talking about, it's so different, right? So one of the things we thought about was maybe we ought to change it from Global Technology Distributor to something else. The problem is it has a little bit of brand value in it. We've been doing it for 25 years. And in the end, after we did the study, it concluded, well, we probably shouldn't do that. But our GTDC website, when you go on, it has something called a Knowledge Hub.
Okay.
And within the Knowledge Hub, we have an archive of all of our research reports over the last 3 or 4 years, along with a lot of other really good information. One of the other things we do, Julian, is I do a podcast every 3 weeks, and all of those podcasts are in, and we talk to executives from the distribution community. We talk to executives from the vendor community, and then we also talk to other folks within the ecosystem. I'll give you an example. Next month, we're in Europe for our annual European event. And one of the things we always have on our site is our event is somebody talks to what's happening from an economic standpoint. And I just finished a podcast this morning, which will be released in 2 weeks, with a woman from the EIU, which is the Economic Intelligence Unit, who talk about what their view of what's happening in the world and how that could impact IT and the IT space.
Well, Frank, now that you say it, I got to ask the question. What was the summary? Give me a summary of what she thinks. Are we okay?
Yeah. Well, very concerned about two things. One, the timing
Mhm.
of the conflict that we're now in, right?
Sure.
And how long is that going to last? And they've got a number of different scenarios that they've laid out for that. And then the second thing that's having a significant impact is the whole memory shortage.
Oh
The
yeah.
memory shortage piece is clearly a factor. Now, with all that said, overall, the feeling was that unless things really go off the rails and some other significant bad things happen, for the most part, the GDP forecasts were somewhere in the 2 to 2.5% range. Certainly in North America, Europe similar, Asia a little bit higher, and of course, IT typically tracks that at 3 or 4% above that. So, the range people are looking for is somewhere in the, high single digits, IT growth. And hopefully that, we'll see. Hopefully that'll hold, but that's kind of what people are talking about. The other area I would point folks to, Julian, to that point is if you go on our website, you can also have access to our recently completed North America Summit, which we did in Oceanside, California in February. And in that recap that we did, it contains a report from IDC and their view on the global marketplace. And it also has additional information from an economist
Mm.
standpoint. So we provide a lot of this information into the marketplace, in addition to really deep content in a variety of different topics that relate to distributors and the value they provide into the marketplace to both vendors upstream and their customers downstream.
It's great. I mean, that's good data that people should, sometimes the channel folks don't understand how they don't think about how distribution impacts their business. And it's a good understanding to have. And the data points that you're bringing to them, I think this is valuable information that they could leverage to maybe better understand how they should proceed, right? And also build a better relationship with their distributors, right? Find out what's going on, ask a question, right? How are you guys doing AI? How are you guys doing that? Whatever. You'd be surprised how much depth of knowledge that they know, right?
Totally. One of the things we do, Julian, is in each region, we have very significant what we call vendor advisory councils, VAT for
Right.
definition. And we've got about 25 folks, individuals from all the companies that you would think we have,
Right.
right? We've got Dell engaged, we've got Cisco engaged, we've got Palo Alto. They're all
Everybody.
there. And we meet with these folks in each region separately because we don't want to do anything on a global basis because you lose a lot when you do it on a global basis because you miss the nuance associated with
Yeah.
what's really important in that region.
Local
We
stuff.
meet
Yeah.
with them a couple times a year and we talk to them at the vendor level about what's your view of distribution? What else do you need to see? What are you satisfied with? What's working well? What are some things that we could, that could continue to be enhanced? And we spend a lot of time talking to those folks, um, and it's proven extraordinarily valuable. And by the way, a lot of the research reports that we're talking about come directly from what they say they would like us to help them with. And so that's another part of what we try to do.
A lot of good intel. Well, Frank, thank you for bringing this to our attention, and I'm sure there's a lot of information out there they should dig into. All the best. Keep us posted on things that are coming along.
I
Cheers.
will, I will, Julian, and I'll be happy to talk to you and your audience anytime you want.
Sounds great. Take care. Cheers.
Appreciate it.